Sorry.
Oh, okay. So I'm going to call it to order at 12:05, and then we can just we can't vote on anything. Do we have a treasurer's? Oh, the minutes are now AI. That's awesome. And you could go back and watch them, or you can read them in paragraph form. So it was an active meeting, and I appreciate everybody's participation. So I'd entertain a motion to approve today's, oh, we can't do that. We're just gonna have to do it. Treasurer's report, Amy, are we still solvent?
We are still solvent, yes.
Okay,
And taxes, our accountant Bruce is working on it. We have to file by the 15th. I do feel like I'm missing some receipts. Michael, I know you haven't been paid recently. Um,
did I,
I think you're muted.
do I have, I bought some stuff from Etsy and on
Yeah,
the,
I'll be sending that to you tonight, Amy. I apologize. I've been just running all over the place.
No, no problem at all. I asked you to kind of send them in chunks anyway, so
Yeah,
that's on me, but I just want to make sure we get that in the right part of the books. And then,
absolutely. I should have that to you tonight.
okay, Susan, yeah, I know from the conference, there are a couple things that you need to be reimbursed for.
no, y'all paid for them. I put them on the card.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So no reimbursement needed. What
Uh-uh,
about from saluting branches? I guess Christopher isn't here.
on the card.
All on the card.
But I don't know what he did, I don't know what lunch was.
Um, Someone else, I don't know what lunch was. I know tree surgeons did the donuts and the coffee, so I'll reimburse that. Um, and then
I'm sure
I
he put
don't
it
think
on the
there's
card.
any other events in the last 2 months I need receipts for.
I don't think we'd have anything else. I mean, I bought the stuff for saluting branches and uh conference, and I think those are the only expenditures that we've had besides lunch.
I
Did
do
we
too,
do
Michael.
did we do
And then
donuts for Rainbow Workshop a couple of months ago?
no, we did that for saluting branches. Those were the ones I was referring to.
Okay.
But we used to pay a guy for web hosting, and I can't remember who that was. We don't do that anymore.
No, no,
Okay,
that's all fun.
the one we split with Cross Timbers, sort of. We're done with that.
Well, no, we never did that. We talked about.
We did. There was I don't have it in front of me. I'd get like one invoice a year.
That's for Texas Tree Trails
Yes.
web
What's
hosting.
the status of that? Who do I need to talk to get that so I can make sure that's evened
That
up?
would be Cross Timbers, or I don't know. Steve might.
Yeah, the Texas Tree Trails has annual expenses. I think every 6 months we have expenses that rotate. Historic Tree Coalition pays it once, then Cross Timbers, and then Trinity Blacklands. So that's for web hosting, the SSL certificate, and
Yes.
and then there's a Dropbox that we've been paying for to store some of the information from the Texas Tree Trails.
Okay, I haven't gotten that on the books for this year. So our rotation is probably coming up then.
Well, yeah, it's coming due fairly soon. It might be the Historic Tree Coalition's time to pay it. And I was going to mention the next thing that I was going to mention about the Texas Tree Trails is that Doug's health is not doing well. So he's our webmaster. I'm not sure what to do about it.
Well, we're gonna have to integrate Texas Tree Trails into our website. We have the ability, Michael says, but all that information, data that you have, Michael would have speak to it, Michael. We've talked about this. Hello? Oh, he probably has a video. Bless his heart.
Sorry, I had announcements going on above me. I couldn't hear.
Oh,
But
my.
as far as the, yeah, we would, I mean, as far as the database type stuff, I would just need to have to see what we're working with, and I'm sure we could figure out something to make that work. Just see what kind of plans we want to do, if we want, whichever way we want to go.
My understanding was that the software the Tree Trails uses is pretty old software from long ago, and it might not be able to be integrated to your current website. So it may be just keeping it running where it is, I think, is my understanding.
Okay. Okay.
Well, he'd have to get in and look at it because all that data, I mean, where there's a will, there's a way, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
but
probably just have to look and see what I haven't really even seen what the platform is for that. So I just have to
either
look
way
at that.
it's done, it's got to be done because Doug's sick and this
Yeah.
has to be taken care of. So, how do you want to approach it,
We
Steve?
somewhat tried to prepare for this. That's where Doug got all this stuff up on a Dropbox site so that somebody could take it over in the future. It could be integrated into a different type of software and website, but it would take an awful large amount of work because it's a lot of data.
Mm-hmm.
So, I may check with another friend that helped us with the Historic Tree Coalition website to see if he would help or somebody else, because it's not just changing it over to another site or getting it up and running, it's keeping it running.
Right.
Because your champion trees change all the time. There's a tree that dies, there's a new tree that's added. So there's an ongoing maintenance component that is going to take time. And if we had a volunteer to do it, Doug has been our volunteer doing that. He created the site 20 something years ago. So we've been very fortunate to have his help. We'd love to find somebody else like him, in other words.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. And
So I'll work on it and see if I can find somebody. I know Michael has plenty to do. If he, has a good plan for how we could integrate it in the future into the existing one, I'm open to it. Just, let's talk further in the future.
Yeah, Steve, I might need to just get with you and see if I can get in the back end just to see what we got, what we're working with, and see if there's any way for any compatibility with the integration of into our current site. I just need to just take a look and see what we're working with.
Okay, great.
sounds like a lunch meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, so we need to meet, so November 30th, and we were thinking about holding a Zoom and in-person meeting in Plano so that we can do, we're obviously gonna have to because nobody's here today. And then we're looking at meeting in December. We have 3 things coming up. We have our membership meeting in January, which there's going to be a couple of bylaw things like the AI and some, but and then the bilingual workshop and the urban forestry workshop. So the 14th or the 21st in December, I vote for the 14th. Hello?
Yeah, 14 looks good.
Okay. And then January 19th will be our membership meeting, but let's call it a membership greeting. And then Mark has a friend in Richardson that owns a really nice restaurant that we could meet at. And it would be more, we'll have to have a meeting, there'll be an agenda, but we could have dinner and eat, etc. Drink. That always makes it happy. What do y'all think? Do those dates work for you, kind of? Okay, so we're looking at November 30th, December 14th, and January 19th. Okay, y'all like those? Well, we'll
Yeah.
put them out, and if we can always change.
December meetings are hard to get people to come to because they're
Amen.
traditionally very busy.
I know, Steve, and this was our vice president. If we don't need it, we won't do it. We'll see what we get done in November. But here's the main thing. Let's go on to this.
I'm sorry, the November the 30th is the ISAT board meeting.
Oh,
I won't be there. I don't know if that makes anybody else. That doesn't affect anyone but me.
okay. Well, then okay, on this bilingual workshop, Amy.
Yes.
Who's going to be on that committee with you? I'll help.
Okay. Whoever wants to be, I mean,
we'll just have to reach out because we can't obviously do it here. But do you have a definite date? February?
yes, it's February 20th.
Okay.
And then
Agri-Life.
the biggest thing we need is someone to get like vendors for a trade show, like a mini trade show.
Right. Vendors and sponsors.
And I'm not the right person to do that.
Why?
So, well, I don't like interact with that, like the
Okay.
people who buy stuff, that equipment, so that the climber equipment. And I'm going to focus my effort on getting people there.
Okay. So, vendors and sponsors. Who is big in the commercial industry that we're working with? You know who we need is Rasmussen.
I think he said he would work on that, and I think he's a great fit. And
I'll help with that. If they'll just give me a list, I can sell dirt to a farmer.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean, it's a good
We're all in
population
this
to
together.
have.
If they
It's
come, I mean, it's a win-win situation. You set up there, you're going to be on ISAT website. You're going to be on our website. You're going to meet people that are going to buy your stuff.
Yeah, you're meeting with that's the biggest thing is you're meeting with your customer base. So
It's a
I think
win-win
it's an easy
situation.
sell. We just need someone to do it.
Okay, well, okay, Amy. So will you reach out I'll reach out to Chris, but if you let me know when you want to meet, we can start meeting on that. Okay, just call. We don't have to, and we can do small Zoom meetings too. We have that ability.
Yep. Great.
So we can talk after this, Amy. I'm putting down Amy contact.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. It's so funny. I was looking at this card from the conference from Tree Man Solutions, and it's a friend of Preston's. And I sat down because I was looking for board members, and I was talking to everybody and talking it up. And he said, well, that's my friend, and he's with Tree Man Solutions, and he would be a good one. And I went, really? You're letting me have him? Okay. So I haven't followed up yet, but I have 2 or 3 contacts from the conference. Also talked to Ronnie Nelson on the board about his those college kids are a perfect fit for the internship program. Right?
Yep. Does anyone know anyone over at Sobo that we can get involved? They have so much money to throw around that we need to get them involved.
Who?
Southern Botanical.
Southern. Oh yes. I made he is on your board, and his name's
Kenny.
Lenny and
Kenny.
Kenny.
Okay.
Kenny. I told him that we would be able to help him. He's interested in the internship program. And I said, well, if you will join our board, we would gladly help you and assist in anything. So I haven't reached out to him yet, but when you see him at your board meeting, you might mention that Susan mentioned that you might be interested in assisting us. And we have this bilingual workshop coming up. And I just think it'd be a perfect fit.
Yeah, I feel like if we could get, yeah,
No, you don't like him?
that'd be
Which
good.
one?
No, I do. That's good. I just was hoping someone knew someone better.
Well, Michael has a lady that's in his Toastmaster class or group that's from Southern Botanical.
Yeah, I can reach out to her too.
Break the ice
She,
with
sh-
her.
yeah, she wasn't there this week, so I'll
She's
see if I
in
can reach out to her.
marketing. She's in marketing, Amy.
Nice.
So we can do that one. Okay. All right. Then so we'll get into that. And then did you like those names I put out for the workshop?
I think they're fun.
Um,
I think we should just San Antonio just calls it San Antonio Bilingual Tree Worker Workshop or something. I think we should keep the same thing as DFW and then just hosted by TBUFC.
right. Make it easy, keep it easy. But I just liked TBUFC Polyglot. A boriculture polyglot. Anyway, the shade keeper training is November 4th, so that's going to be the day after the 85 historic trees, and that's indoor training at the Grand Prairie Library. And I know that myself, Jim Pataka, I never can say his last name right, Mike Sills, Chris Rasmussen, and Preston, I'll reach out to them and I'll put a little meeting together on that. And then November 18th, we're going to do the outdoor training. And I do have that location and I will send the location out. And then on February 3rd, we're going to do fruit tree pruning and we do have a location. So I'll send both of those. And then I would love to do training in other cities, but when we do training in other cities, then we follow under their jurisdiction. Who's going to do the background checks, etc., that's needed to do work on municipal property? Also, who's going to schedule that work? So when we go to Grand Prairie, that's all set up, and the people that are trained there work there. So we need our program to be malleable enough to fit to each community, because each community is going to have different needs and wants, a different way they handle their volunteers. So if anyone approaches us, we have the training and we're ready to go. Because I think somebody said something about Rowlett at the last meeting. But we're ready, willing, and able. And then saluting branches. One thing here that I wanted to add was I talked to Jim Casey with Rainbow. And his Rainbow used to be on the original group that formed saluting branches. For some reason they got out, but he's really adamant about he wants to be more involved in that and get the date changed to where it's not the week before or after conference, which is always a pain for all of us, or the week of conference. And his father's buried at the National Cemetery at DFW, so he's really adamant about wanting to assist us. So I have to reach out to Jim about saluting branches, but I don't know if they've set a date. And I'll check with Chris on current status. How many people were at that event? I never got an update. Do we know, was it well attended? We'll ask. All right. Well, the EAB and additional assistance in urban forestry for the city of Dallas. Blake couldn't make it. And at least he texted me, and I'm gonna speak with him next week. And we'll maybe I can find out something about that event on Friday, the 3rd. All right, Mike, could you do a web update for us?
Sure. Yeah, right now, not a whole lot going, just been mostly keeping up all of the database and maintenance on the back end. It's really been it's been pretty much just updating the material just as I continued from in September. I'm just really trying to I'm really working on the agenda and minutes section of it. And I think we're getting a pretty good style now because we'll put these videos from our monthly meetings here, and I'll have them available on the web page for everybody to view, as well as the minutes from that are generated from the meeting. So I think we're getting a little rhythm here as far as getting everything getting posted pretty quickly. So I think it's all working out pretty well, and just again just continuing to just to keep putting content out there on all the great things that are happening. But that's really about all that's going on for the October report.
Well, you're doing a great job, and the link works, and you now have the ability to hold these little individual meetings, and that really helps.
Sure.
Hey, where was I? Where am I on the agenda, Michael?
Number 10.
Number 10, social media. Well, we haven't done anything, and that's on my back right now, and it's not, we shall recruit. You know how you don't talk to sponsors well, Amy? Well, I don't do social media. I don't do electronics. Poor Michael. I sent him this little gift that says the rare heroes in my life are the ones that put up with me every day.
Well, let's throw out the there's a couple cool things. What Steve was talking about earlier with the Dallas protecting or naming 100 historic trees. We
Right.
should share that. Texas Forest Service is giving away some free trees right now.
Right.
Oh
And
no, the Arbor
put
Day
all that on our
Foundation.
website, but we're not doing Facebook, and we're not doing Twitter, and we're not doing,
Well,
you know what I
can't
mean?
we set it automatically where any like blog or thing we share on the website is shared across like Insta and Facebook?
There are some things that we could do. I could certainly check into that for us. There's a platform that will send out if you do like a post or whatever, it will if you connect the Facebook account or whatever ones we do have, it will send out simultaneously for that. We
Yeah.
can schedule the dates we want. We can even do it far out if we wanted to. And there is some software out there that you can get to send out and control your social media posts.
Yeah, I think it's a minimal cost plugin just to share across the
Okay.
board. I don't know if we need to
I can certainly check into
schedule or
that for us.
anything.
Sure.
Website, social media posts. Cool. And Michael's going to look into that. Okay, good job, Amy. More work, Michael.
No problem.
Okay, the Urban Forestry Management Planning Workshop. No one is here from that committee except for myself. Mark is out tagging trees where they're going to put a water line in. Anyway, he's going to call me next week and we'll talk. And I thought of a couple of names for the shop, like Urban Arboriculture Management or Academy of Urban Arboriculture. Just But that could, we need a committee for that group. And it used to be Mike Sills, well, Mark Boating, Mike Sills, Michael Levy, Blake, and Preston, and myself. I'll reach out to all of those people. If anyone else wants to join, they can. And Speakers Bureau. Michael posted my Let's Get Growing videos and some other videos and some other data, and then people start reaching out to me and saying, oh, I saw your, oh, this is, I'm like, cool. So people are looking at the site and using that information. So good job, Michael. And I will, I guess, that used to be Will Hit with me, and he's no longer with us. And nobody's really stepped up since then. Would anyone like to be on that Speakers Bureau? Because basically you would have to be able to answer questions on the information there, or just disseminate or direct traffic or post stuff up. But we'll reach out. And then Texas Tree Trails. We kind of got an update. You want to tell us more? Besides, we really are sad about Doug. Is there anything we can do to help with him?
No, not necessarily. I think we pretty well covered the subject. Michael was going to look into it further. I'm going to check with the webmaster that helped us out with the Historic Tree Coalition a number of years ago. And so we'll see how it goes. We've got to get somebody to manage the site in the future. And we always need people to go out and remeasure trees. We still got 70, 80 trees to measure. So
Right.
plenty to do there.
Good job. Yeah, just keep pushing. That's all you can do. Mark Boating is going to be our Texas Urban Forestry Council representative. And I've spoken with what's his name with TFS? Mac.
Mike Sills?
No.
Mac,
What's his last name?
Martin, was it?
Yeah, Mac Martin. He's the new community coordinator for the Forest Service, like Paul Johnson used to be. He's got a pretty big, he wears a pretty big hat. So he also is willing to assist us with that urban forestry management workshop. He'd like to be heavily involved in that. Not heavily, but you know, he can help us out. And then we will always have this long-term planning that we have to do. And I need to reach out to Mike on that. Has anybody talked to Mike lately?
I saw him on Saturday. He came down to the event down in New Braunfels. He spoke during the event for a while.
Cool. All right. And then our next meeting is scheduled for November 30th in Zoom in person. We'll put it kind of tentative, but right now let's go for it if we can. If you can be there, please be there. And I guess I'm going to try and get all these committees to meet off at another time, and people start talking to each other so we can get some of this, you know, worked out. We've got all this coming up. How many volunteers are we going to need, Amy? Do you know that?
I don't know that. I'm always happy to offer up the Texas tree surgeon staff for volunteer work. So
no, you are, darling, but
that's sort of what I figured. As long as, like, you know, we're all there, the board's there.
Yeah.
I don't foresee it needing that many
you're
with
gonna have
the
to have people-
ISAT managing the registration.
Right, but you have to have people, you're gonna have to guide and direct traffic, you usually have to have 2 to 3 at registration. And then, we can talk about that. They handle all of
Okay.
that, thank God. Where was I going with that? Shit. Damn it. Oh, t-shirts. Phew, finally, I have been going back and forth with the people that are doing our t-shirt, and right now it's a tree with long roots on one side, and the roots will say TBUFC. We'll see what it looks like if everybody likes it, but I'm trying to get us a t-shirt so we can wear it to these events.
Nice.
Awesome.
So, and yard signs and, table skirt and all that kind of stuff.
I am pretty anti-swag because I never use it and I'm funny about that. But I wasn't planning on doing any swag for the bilingual thing.
Are you talking about the American flag?
No swag. I'm sorry.
Oh,
like
swag. Oh, okay.
yeah, like a bag
Oh,
of junk that ends up in your dumpster.
no, no, but we do need
So
speaker gifts.
speaker gifts, great. I think that's lovely, but I don't think
Who does lunch?
rainbow.
Sweet. And we don't have to do any speaker travel arrangements or anything.
Mark and Mike are covering that.
For the bilingual?
Yep.
Oh my God. Okay. It'll be fun. This could be so much fun. February 20th. Have they put anything up on the website yet?
Not yet, but they will
That's-
soon.
Well, you have to have a name. So you're gonna go with DFW Bilingual Workshop?
Yeah, I'll just make it the same as the San Antonio one and just change that out.
Okay. And then put our brand on it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, works for me. DFW Bilingual. And then as soon as that goes up, let us Michael know so we can put that up.
Got it.
And they'll just link to the ISA.
Yeah.
Okay. Sweet. All right, well, back to our next meeting on November 30th, Zoom and in person would be in Plano. Okay. Anybody want to quit? I mean, adjourn? What time is it, Michael?
Right now, we're at 12:40.
Okay, so without further ado, I guess we can't vote on it, so we're just gonna adjourn at 12:40. How's that?
All right.
Thank you so much.
Bye, y'all.
Talk to you soon.
All right.